I want to read you something beautiful. It's Paul's prayer, which you can find in his epistle to the Ephesians, chapter 3, verse 14. I'm reading from the Jerusalem Bible that has a particularly nice translation. Paul's prayer. This then is what I pray, kneeling before the Father, from whom every family, whether spiritual or natural, takes its name. Out of his infinite glory, may he give you the power through his Spirit for your hidden self to grow strong. Now, I'm going to stop there because if I read the whole thing, I'm going to pass by it without mentioning it. Did you notice the phrase, your hidden self? Somewhere in the Gospel of Thomas, Christ talks about a hand in a hand and a foot in a foot. We have an inner self, and this inner self grows one way or the other. You see, we're born, let's see if I can explain this to you. We're born first of the flesh, first of matter, and then later of the spirit. But we stand on the cusp of two dimensions, somewhere between heaven and hell. And depending upon the inclination of our soul, we move toward one or toward the other. Now, this is not the case for animals. They're purely natural. But human beings, there's this choice factor. And it's not even really a choice. It's an inclination, a yearning, a desire, a true love, if you will. Now, let's look at when you put things on the board, like where you put pluses on one side and minuses on the other, So let's look at what we have. Well, first of all, we're born of the flesh. So that means that initially we're inclined toward the flesh. Secondly, we're born with a nature that we inherit from Adam. This is the nature, the acquisitive nature, the ambitious nature, the restless nature, the nature that is subject to temptation. And we're born subject to authorities, wrong authorities that preceded us, our parents and all the other authorities in our life. They represent this world. Maybe they do the best they can, but all they can do is struggle. They struggle and then they teach you how to struggle. That's all they can do. So you're born subject to wrong authorities, subject to temptation. You come into a fallen world, a world of tease, of challenge, of cruelty, of injustice. And sooner or later it gets to you. And when it gets to you, you respond angrily and resentfully. And before long, you get enmeshed in your struggle with all of that stuff, you see? But now, what's on the other side of the ledger? Well, on the other side is you are born with a gift, the gift of intuition from God. He gives you that gift by which you can see and by which you can know wordlessly. Wordlessly. Now, you have that gift. And that gift from God comes from Him. And it's basically your ability to perceive in His inner light. And if you were to follow that inner light, you follow your intuition, it would lead you from one thing to another. It would lead you to make the right decisions, to say yes when instead of no, and no instead of yes, and turn right instead of left, and so on a very delicate but wonderful journey through life that would lead you to God. So now, there you are. But God wanted to create love. He wanted to give us the ability to love Him. And in order to love Him, there has to be an alternative to Him. You see what I mean? So, we're born subject to tease and so on. We're born naturally selfish. And so we go through life. But then at a certain point, some of us begin to yearn for something more. We yearn for something more. And eventually He answers. Then we begin our journey back to Him by way of His inner light. Back to Him. And now we start a journey of discovery as if nothing, it's almost as if nothing had happened. So you're born, your parents, your mom hates your dad fails, he's angry, you go to school, other kids come from rotten homes, they tease, and they're cruel, and the educational system is just pressure, education pressure, knowledge pressure, performance pressure, grade pressure. You fall into that and you get all messed up and you get very angry and you conform or rebel. And the more you conform or rebel, all you do is take that. It all comes in. It comes in. That's how the wrong self is formed inside the dark self. Because what's coming in through all those traumas where you react wrongly to the outside, what's coming in is a self that is created from responding to temptation. That's basically the way I'll put it. So this is the dark self. And it's the self that's always there. It's like a false conscience. It talks to you in your mind. You think it's your very own thinking, but it always gives you the wrong answers, inclines you in the wrong direction, makes wrong seem right and right seem wrong, and it avoids truth, and it teaches you to avoid the truth, and you're guilty because you've resented some people and you've been selfish, and so you go along with it, and it misleads you. It's a wrong self that is formed out of the destruction of what you could have been. What you have is consumed, and in the consumption, this other thing forms very slowly, inexorably. It takes shape. Now, when you come back over to the bright side, when God turns up the dimmer switch on the light and you begin to see your own wrongs, but this time you have a new attitude. Now you incline toward the truth. You incline toward the truth. You lean toward the truth. It's like if you're having a tooth pulled, instead of running from the dentist and running away, you sit there in the chair and you let the tooth be pulled. Do you see what I mean? Even though it's painful. So you incline toward the truth, and it's a little painful because you have to see your own wrong, your own selfishness, your resentments, your hatreds, your phoniness with people, your impatience with your children. You have to see all that. You hated your mom, you hated your dad. You have to see that. And then a new self begins to grow in the light. A new self. And as it says here in Paul's prayer, your hidden self. May God give you the power through his Spirit for your hidden self to grow strong. But now, I never did get to the point that I wanted to get to very, very quickly, and that is that from the time you were a little child until the light begins to dawn and you make the transition from death to life in your moment of repentance. Before that, there was a lot of water under the bridge. A lot of things happened. You raged, and you were hurt, and you were angry, and you were unhappy, and you struggled, and it was just a lot of bad stuff. But you know what? When you make the transition over to God, to the light, and you begin to walk in the light, then eventually it's as if that stuff never happened. All that remains is a beautiful, blessed present. Yeah, there's a period of weeks, months, maybe even years, where you do have to, there's a review process. Every day you see a little bit from your past. One day you suddenly realize that you hated your sister. I'm just making something up. You see it, but now you see it in God's light, and you're sad about what you see. You regret. Now you see she couldn't help herself. And you see your own error, and you're sorry. You don't hate her anymore, you see? And you let it go. Or one day you see that you spend too much money on shoes. I'm just making something up. Then you look back and you flash upon times in your past when you bought shoes and you shouldn't have bought them, and you wasted a lot of money on them. And then you resented losing money on them, and then you didn't buy any shoes, and that wasn't the answer. So you went back and forth between buying too many shoes and not buying shoes. And then one day you also see it all started when you were a little kid one time, and somebody at school laughed at your shoes, and you resented it. See what I mean? You see that, and then you know what? It's gone. So 1,000 little things like that. You see, always more subtle, less painful. The first things are very painful when you see that you hated your dad or hated your mom. But then weeks, months later, you see very subtle things, very subtle errors that you've made, subtle wrong moves, subtle efforts, subtle tensions. You see it in God's light. And then one day it's as if the past never happened. Okay? Now let me continue. I'll start again. This then is what I pray, kneeling before the Father, from whom every family, whether spiritual or natural, takes its name. Out of his infinite glory, may he give you the power through his Spirit for your hidden self to grow strong, so that Christ may live in your hearts through faith, and then, planted in love and built on love, you will with all the saints have strength to grasp the breadth and the length, the height and the depth, until knowing the love of Christ, which is beyond all knowledge, you are filled with the utter fullness of God. That's very beautiful. The utter fullness of God. I think Father Dubay, I think he called it the utterfulness of God. Isn't that beautiful to describe his greatness, his wonderfulness, that's beyond any words? So you can imagine, all you have to do is look at a flower. In our front patio, we have a cactus, and this cactus has sat there for years. It's not a very attractive looking thing as far as plants go, just sort of a green, oddly shaped thing. But this year it's making beautiful flowers. The most beautiful, bright, purple flower you could imagine. But when I see that, you know what I realize? That God put something of that wonderfulness, that beauty, that love that was put into making it. Every aspect of that beautiful flower somehow just tells you about its creator. You know, if you see a picture painted, you know something about the artist. The flower tells you something about the artist, God, our Heavenly Father. And so now, I just want to leave you with this. This beautiful little prayer talks about, asks that, and said that you will with all the saints have the strength to grasp the breadth and the length, the height and the depth, until knowing the love of Christ, which is beyond all knowledge, you are filled with the utter fullness of God. So if you can imagine the wonder of that flower, the creativity, the genius, the beauty, the substance, the elegance of that flower, can you imagine the wonderfulness of the love that comes through Christ from God? Could you imagine what that must be like? It must be utterly wonderful and elegant and sweet and strong and kind and beautiful, ravishingly beautiful. It's just beyond words. So I like that. So this translation is exquisite. You might want to get it. You can find the Jerusalem Bible online. There's a new version and the older. I think this is the older version. They may both be the same, but I think this is the older version. It's very beautifully said. It's a beautiful prayer, beautifully translated, and I hope you enjoyed this little talk.